Your brother needs a real workspace, my mother said, setting down her fork like she was closing a meeting. Your studio has everything he needs. You can use the dining room table. I didn't argue. I said okay, finished my wine, and went upstairs to start packing. 3 weeks later, my phone hadn't stopped ringing. Let me back up. I'm 32. I work in UX design fully remote for a mid-sized tech company based out of Austin. I've been doing this for 6 years, and for the last 3 of those years, I've been living in my parents' house in Naperville, Illinois. Not because I couldn't afford to leave, but because the arrangement made sense at the time. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. When I moved back in after my divorce, the plan was 6 months. Just enough time to clear my head, rebuild my savings, figure out what came next. My parents have a 4-bedroom house with a finished basement, and the room above the garage had been sitting empty since my older brother moved out years ago. It had its own entrance, its own half bath, and enough square footage to be useful. I asked if I could renovate it. They said yes. I spent $22,000 of my own money over 4 months turning it into a proper home studio, soundproof panels on 2 walls, a standing desk set up with dual monitors, a dedicated fiber line I ran through the exterior of the house because the household Wi-Fi couldn't handle video calls and a 4K upload simultaneously. I bought a daybed and a mini fridge and hung blackout curtains. I painted the walls a warm gray that didn't feel like a bedroom or an office, but something in between, a place that was entirely mine. In exchange for the room, I paid my parents $800 a month, covered the streaming services, kept the family's wireless plan going under my name, and set up their smart home devices when my dad decided he wanted to feel like he lived in the future. I also started handling the household finances in a loose, informal way, not because anyone asked me to, but because nobody else was doing it. And watching my parents overdraft their checking account at 63 felt like something I could fix. I was 32 years old and I had rebuilt my entire life inside a room above a garage. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine and it worked. My brother Trent is 36. He's 4 years older than me, which he's always treated as a form of authority. He moved back home 8 months before I did, following a business venture that didn't pan out. Something involving a food truck and a business partner he described as a visionary and later described as a con artist. He took the guest bedroom on the main floor and said he'd be out in 3 months. That was 2.5 years ago. Trent's girlfriend Sabrina moved in 6 months after he did. She's 29, works occasionally in event coordination, and has a lifestyle Instagram with about 4,000 followers that she refers to as her brand. She and Trent have been talking about starting a couple's content channel for as long as I can remember, the kind where they document their life together, do cooking segments, maybe flip furniture. It's always just about to happen. I liked Sabrina well enough. She was funny when she wasn't performing, and she brought good wine to family dinners. But I noticed early on that she had a way of surveying rooms when she walked into them, not in a curious way, in an appraising way. She did it to my studio the first time she saw it. "This is incredible," she said, standing in the doorway, turning her head slowly like she was imagining furniture she hadn't bought yet. "The light in here is perfect for filming." "Thanks," I said. "I designed it for work." She smiled and didn't say anything else, but she stood in that doorway for a few seconds longer than necessary. That was 14 months before my mother told me to use the dining room table. The dinner where everything shifted happened on a Sunday in October. My mom had made pot roast, which she only does for occasions she considers significant. I noticed that when I came in. The good plates were out. Trent had shaved. We sat down and got through the first 10 minutes of small talk before my dad cleared his throat in the way he does when he's rehearsed something. "So," he said, "we have some news." He looked at Trent. Trent looked at Sabrina. Sabrina put a hand over her mouth like she was trying to hold something in and failing. "We're getting married," Trent said. My mother made a sound I can only describe as operatic. She pushed back her chair and went around the table, and there was hugging, and my dad shook Trent's hand, and for a few minutes the kitchen felt warm and full in a way it hadn't in a while. I hugged Sabrina. I told her congratulations and meant it. Then the dinner continued. and I noticed the conversation had a direction it was moving toward. I could feel it, the way you feel weather changing. We've been thinking about the wedding, Sabrina said, about 20 minutes in. We want to do something intimate. Maybe the backyard, next September. That would be beautiful, my mum said. We'd want to document everything, the whole process, the planning, the day itself. We've been talking about finally launching the channel. Sabrina glanced at Trent. We think the engagement and the wedding content could really be the thing that builds our audience. My dad nodded like this made complete sense. You'd need a real setup for that. That's the thing, Trent said, and I felt the air shift. We've been doing some research. To do it right, you need a proper studio. Good lighting, sound treatment, enough space for a backdrop, room for editing equipment. I kept my face neutral. I had a very sudden and specific understanding of where we were. My mother said, your sister's room above the garage would be perfect for that. Not a question. A solution delivered in her warm, practical, this is obvious voice. I set my fork down. That's my office, I said. We know, Trent said. But you can work from anywhere, right? That's the whole point of remote work. The whole point of remote work is that I built a workspace that lets me do my job properly, which I paid for. You'd still have access to it, Sabrina said quickly. We're not saying kick you out. Just share the space. We'd mainly use it evenings and weekends. I work evenings and weekends. I'm in a different time zone from my team. My dad waved his hand in the loose, dismissive way he does when he considers a problem to be administrative rather than real. You can figure out the schedule. The point is, your brother is starting something important. This is a big moment for them. I know it's a big moment, I said, and I'm happy for them, but I'm not giving up my studio. Giving up, my mother repeated, and her voice had changed. Nobody's asking you to give anything up. We're asking you to be a little flexible for your family. I paid $22,000 to build that room. You paid it to renovate a room in our house, my dad said, not unkindly exactly, but with a precision that told me he'd thought about this framing in advance, which was very generous. We appreciate it. But the house is ours. There it was. I looked at the four of them. My mother, who hadn't filed her own taxes since 2019 because I'd started doing it and then just kept doing it. My father, who had called me in a panic last spring when he got a letter from the HOA and didn't know what it meant, a letter I'd resolved in one phone call. My brother, who had borrowed my car for a ski trip in February and returned it with a cracked side mirror and a gas tank on empty, and who had never once mentioned it afterward. Sabrina, who had 3 times asked me to take a quick look at her Instagram analytics because I understood that stuff. They didn't see a person sitting at that table, they saw an amenity. Something in me went very quiet. Okay, I said. Trent blinked. Really? Sure. If you need the space, you should have it. I'll need a few weeks to move my equipment. My mother smiled, relieved. See, that's all we were asking, just flexibility. Of course, I said. I helped clear the dishes. I said goodnight. I went upstairs. I did not sleep. I found the apartment on a Tuesday. It was in Evanston, on the 5th floor of a building 2 blocks from the lake. It was more expensive than I planned, $2,100 a month. But it had good north-facing light, a second room I could make into an office, and walls that didn't carry sound from 4 other people's lives. I signed a lease on Thursday. I didn't tell anyone. I told my parents I needed to move some of my equipment into a storage unit while Trent and Sabrina transitioned into the space. This was technically true. I rented a storage unit on Friday. On Saturday, while my parents were at my aunt's birthday lunch in the suburbs and Trent and Sabrina were at a bridal show downtown, I hired 2 movers off TaskRabbit. We loaded the studio in 3.5 hours. The room above the garage echoed when they were done. I stood in the empty space and looked at the bare walls, the grey paint I'd chosen carefully, the outlets I'd had an electrician at. I thought about the morning I'd stood in this same room with a measuring tape and tried to figure out if there was enough clearance to fit the desk I wanted. I swept the floor. I left my key on the kitchen counter with a note. All yours, Best of luck with the channel. S. I drove to Evanston and unloaded my car into a fifth-floor apartment and sat on the floor with a lukewarm coffee and felt something I didn't have a word for yet. It wasn't happiness exactly, it was more like pressure releasing. The sensation of something that had been pressing on you for so long you'd forgotten it was there, finally lifting. The first week, nothing. I assumed they'd gone into the studio and were busy painting or rearranging or filming their first engagement video. I didn't reach out. I unpacked, assembled furniture I'd ordered to the new address, and took a long walk along the lakefront on a Wednesday afternoon because I could. I was aware in a low-level way that I had made several logistical adjustments before leaving. The wireless plan that covered 5 devices including my parents' phones and Trent's laptop. I'd removed his device and downgraded to a 2-line plan under my own account. My parents' line stayed on for now, but I'd set a reminder to address that at the end of the month. The streaming subscriptions, Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, I'd signed out of all shared devices and changed the passwords. The grocery credit card I'd added my mother as an authorized user on, which she used for groceries and occasionally for things that were not groceries. I'd removed her access and reported the card as lost. New card, new number, shipped to my Evanston address. I hadn't cut the power or done anything dramatic. I'd simply stopped paying for things that were not mine. The house was being returned to its natural state, a state I realized they hadn't experienced in years. The first text came 11 days after I left, my mother asking if I knew why Netflix wasn't working. I waited 4 hours. I changed the password when I moved out. You'll need your own subscription. It's $15.49 a month for the standard plan. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. Moved out. What do you mean moved out? Are you at the storage unit? No, I got an apartment in Evanston. The studio is all yours. I hope the channel goes well. She didn't respond for 6 hours. When she did, it was, why didn't you tell us? Not a question, a statement of injury. I typed and deleted 3 responses. Eventually I mentioned I was moving my equipment. I thought that was clear. 4 days later, my dad called. I let it go to voicemail. Sweetheart, it's Dad. Call me back when you get a chance. The internet in the studio is not working. Trent says there's a separate router up there and he can't figure out the configuration. Also, I think the HOA sent another letter. And the garbage disposal is making a noise. Call me back. I texted him. The studio has its own dedicated line. The account is in my name. I've cancelled it. Trent will need to set up a new account with Comcast. For the HOA and the disposal, I'd suggest calling the HOA number on the letter and looking up disposal repair on YouTube. There are good tutorials for most models. I'm a bit slammed with work this week. My dad responded, this isn't funny, Sloan. My name isn't Sloan. He texted the wrong person. I didn't correct him. I put my phone face down and finished my workday. I followed Sabrina's Instagram from a secondary account I use for design research. Not to be cruel. I was genuinely curious about how the studio was working for them. The first video she posted from the space went up 3 weeks after I left. It was an engagement announcement reel set to an audio clip that was trending that week. Sabrina was sitting at a folding table they'd set up where my desk used to be, holding up her ring. The lighting was terrible. There was a visible shadow across half her face because they'd put the ring light at the wrong angle, and the soundproofing panels I'd installed weren't in frame. They pushed them to the corner to make room for a backdrop they'd hung crookedly. The caption said, "Our little studio era is beginning. Islet. Big things coming." It got 214 likes, mostly from people they knew. By week 3, Sabrina was posting less. The content that did go up was lower energy, shorter, less edited, filmed on her phone rather than the camera I could see in the background of the first reel. In one video, you could hear the garage door opening mid-sentence and she stopped, looked annoyed, and kept going without acknowledging it. Comments were sparse. 2 from accounts I recognized as her friends. 1 from a brand account that had clearly been bot-generated. Trent posted once a short clip where he talked about their creative journey and mentioned they were still figuring out their setup. He looked tired. The thing about the studio was that it had worked because I had built it to work. The soundproofing was effective because I'd done the research. The lighting was good because I'd spent 2 weeks testing it before I bought anything. The internet was fast because I paid for a business tier dedicated line that I'd then cancelled when I left. The room didn't have magic, it had infrastructure. And infrastructure, it turned out, was not included. My mother called on a Sunday evening in late November. I answered because it was Sunday and she only calls on Sunday evenings when something is actually wrong. The heat isn't working in the studio, she said. Trent and Sabrina have been using space heaters, and last night one of them tripped a breaker, and now the whole garage circuit is out. Did you reset the breaker? Your father tried. He thinks he made it worse. The panel is in the utility room. There should be a diagram on the inside of the door showing which breaker controls which zone. The garage and the room above it are probably on the same circuit. If it tripped, flip it fully off and then back on. I don't know how to do that. I know, but you can learn. The videos, Mum. Silence. Allison. Her voice shifted into the register she used when she was cycling through emotions to find one that would work on me. She landed on tired. This is hard. We didn't realize how much you were handling. I know. Trent and Sabrina are really struggling. The channel isn't. It hasn't taken off the way they expected, and the wedding planning is expensive. I imagine so. They need some support. They have you and Dad, and each other. We're on a fixed income, you know that. We can't. Mom. I sat down on my couch. Outside, the lake was doing something beautiful in the grey November light, and I made myself look at it. I love you, and I'm not coming back to fix the breaker or the heat or the internet or the content strategy. This is your house. You're the homeowners. These are homeowner problems. Another silence. Longer. You've made your point, she said finally. We get it. You're angry. But at some point you have to decide if being right is more important than your family. I thought about the dining room table. I thought about the word flexible and the way my dad had said the house is ours, with that careful, pre-considered precision. I'm not angry, I said. I'm really not. I just live somewhere else now. I got off the phone and made dinner and watched something I'd been meaning to watch for months and went to bed at 10 o'clock. It was the best Sunday I'd had in years. They asked to meet in December. My mother suggested the house. I said I'd rather meet somewhere neutral and offered a diner halfway between Naperville and Evanston. They were there when I arrived, all four of them, which I hadn't expected. My parents in their coats, Trent with his jaw set in the way he sets it when he's decided to be the reasonable one, Sabrina looking at her phone. I ordered coffee. I waited. My dad went first. He'd also rehearsed this one. We want to talk about what happened. We think there was a misunderstanding about what we were asking. I don't think there was a misunderstanding, I said. I think I understood exactly what was being asked. You didn't have to leave, my mother said. That was. She searched for a word. Extreme. Probably. But the room above the garage wasn't going to work for me once it was a shared creative studio, and the sewing room doesn't have a window, so... We could have figured something out, Trent said. He sounded almost genuine. Almost. We did figure something out. I figured it out. I got an apartment. Sabrina looked up from her phone. The thing is, she said, and her voice had the careful quality of someone who had also rehearsed, we didn't realize you were handling so many things. With the bills and the subscriptions and everything. We thought. You thought it happened automatically. She paused. Yes. I know. My dad leaned forward. What would it take for you to come back? We could look at having you take over the master suite. Mom and I could move to the main floor guest room. Give you more space. More. Dad, I set my coffee cup down. I have an apartment. I have a real office. I'm not coming back to the house. The studio isn't working, Trent said, quietly. It cost him something to say it. The internet situation, the heat, we can't afford to set it all up from scratch. The wedding is already going to be tight. I looked at my brother. He looked older than 36 in that moment, and not in the distinguished way he was probably hoping for. I know this is hard, I said, and I mean that. But what you're describing as a startup cost for a business you're trying to build, that's normal. You find a way to fund it, or you scale down, or you find a different space. Those are the options. We don't have the capital, Sabrina said. Then you find the capital. There are small business loans, there's Kickstarter, there are shared studio rental spaces in Chicago that charge by the hour. There's also the option of filming in the living room on your phone, which is how most people start. You're enjoying this, Trent said. I thought about that for a second. No, I said. I'm really not. I'd have been happy for you to succeed. I'm still happy for you to succeed. I just can't be the infrastructure for it. My mother put a hand on mine. I let her. You were always the one who held things together, she said. Ever since you were little, you just took care of things. We relied on that maybe more than we should have. This was the closest she'd come to saying it plainly, and I felt it. I know, I said. We love you. I know that too. So what do we do now? I thought about it. You reset the passwords on the accounts you need. I'll help you set up your own subscriptions this week, walk you through it on the phone. For the HOA and the house stuff, there's a neighborhood Facebook group, and they're actually pretty helpful. For the business stuff, I looked at Trent and Sabrina. I'd start smaller, one platform, phone camera, real story, not produced content, people can tell the difference. Trent nodded slowly. And the $22,000, I said. I'm not going to come after it. I'm not saying that to be magnanimous. I'm saying it because it's not worth the relationship. But I need you to know that I know what it cost, and I need you to know that I know what it cost. And I need you to know that I know. My dad looked at the table, understood. I paid for my coffee. I hugged my mother. I shook my brother's hand, which felt strange and right at the same time. I drove back to Evanston on the expressway with the heat on and the radio low. The city came into view slowly, the skyline building itself up from flat suburbs into something vertical and lit. My phone buzzed. A Slack notification from my team lead. Client approved the new prototype. They want to expand the scope. Can we talk tomorrow about resourcing? I smiled. Here's the thing nobody tells you about being the person who handles everything. You get so good at managing other people's emergencies that you forget you're allowed to have a life that isn't one. You start to believe your value is in your availability, that your seat at the table is conditional on what you contribute to everyone else at it. The studio had been mine, not just the room, the whole careful, expensive, intentional construction of a life that worked. And when they took it, they weren't just asking for square footage. They were telling me, without meaning to, that what I'd built didn't really belong to me, that it was communal property by default, that my needs were the ones that could flex. I had flexed, just not in the direction they expected. The exit for my neighborhood came up and I took it. I found parking half a block from my building, which almost never happens. I took it as a sign of nothing in particular, because I've gotten out of the habit of needing the universe to confirm my decisions. Upstairs, my apartment was quiet and warm and entirely mine. I made tea. I opened my laptop. I looked at the city through the window for a while without needing it to mean anything. Some people will tell you that walking away from family is the hardest thing you can do. Maybe for some people it is. But I'd been walking toward them for years, filling every gap they left open, smoothing every rough edge before they could feel it. That was the thing that had cost me something. Walking away, it turned out, was the easy part. I still think about the moment I swept that empty room for the last time. The grey walls, the outlets I'd had installed, the floor I'd measured twice before ordering the desk. It echoed in a way it never had when my things were in it. And I remember thinking, this is what it looks like when you stop subsidizing someone else's version of reality. What happened to my family wasn't punishment. I want to be clear about that because I've turned it over enough times to know the difference. Nobody cursed them. No invisible force came to balance the scales. What happened was simply this. The system they'd built their daily lives around had a single point of failure, and that point of failure was me, and I walked out of it. The consequences were always going to follow. They were built into the structure from the beginning. I just hadn't been willing to see it. Or maybe I had seen it, and I kept filling the gaps anyway because filling gaps was the only version of belonging I knew how to do. That's the thing I had to sit with afterward. Not anger at them, not satisfaction at watching it unravel, but the quiet reckoning with my own role in it. I had made myself indispensable in a way that wasn't sustainable, and I had done it partly out of love and partly because I didn't trust anyone else to do it right, and partly because being needed felt safer than asking to be wanted. That's not a comfortable thing to admit. But it's the true one. What I've come to understand is that real integrity, the kind that holds up when it's inconvenient, isn't about grand gestures. It's about the small daily decision to be honest about what you can carry and what you can't. I had been dishonest for years, not to them exactly, to myself. I kept telling myself it was fine, that I didn't mind, that family is supposed to be this way. And every time I absorbed a cost that wasn't mine, I was quietly teaching everyone around me that my boundaries were theoretical. Leaving required a different kind of intelligence than I'd been using. Not the problem-solving kind I'd applied to their tax returns and HOA letters and router configurations. The kind that asks, what is this situation actually teaching the people I love? Because sometimes the most useful thing you can do for someone is stop being useful to them in the ways that keep them from figuring it out themselves. And then there's the part that took the longest, the follow-through. Deciding to leave is one thing. Not going back when my mother's voice cracked on a Sunday evening, not resetting the breaker, not picking up the call from my dad who'd texted the wrong name. That required something I can only describe as a kind of stubbornness rooted in self-respect, not coldness, not indifference. Just the understanding that love without limits isn't love. It's a loan with no repayment plan, and eventually it comes due. I don't know what my brother and Sabrina will build. Maybe they'll figure it out. Maybe the channel will never happen and they'll both get jobs and look back on this period of their lives with embarrassment and some hard-won clarity. I hope so. I genuinely do. What I know is what I built in that fifth-floor apartment. Slowly, quietly, on my own terms. A life that doesn't require anyone's permission to exist. That turns out to be the only kind worth having.